Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where you are. I'm Tamara Ecker, Managing Director of British American Business, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Accelerate session focused on expansion into New York City. For those of you not familiar with British American Business, we are the leading transatlantic business association supporting companies with operations both in the US and the UK markets. And our Accelerate initiative is an open community supporting those businesses looking to grow and expand into either the US or the UK. Today, we have a fantastic panel of experts, including one of the most well-connected New York City strategy firms, businesses who have successfully grown into New York City, and those who have advised them on that growth. And I should say our Accelerate series is made possible thanks to the partnership and support of BAB members Virgin Atlantic, Delta, and Capilino. So with that, I am going to introduce our moderator for today's session, BAB board member and BAB Accelerate steering committee member, Nick Barton, who is the founder and CEO of the Barton Partnership, which is a niche global executive recruitment firm focusing on strategy, transformation, and M&A. Nick is the perfect person to moderate us today because he is an example of someone who has started a UK business and grown that business into other markets, including New York. So Nick, I will hand it over to you to get us started.
Great, thanks Tamara. Hi everyone, good to see everyone today. Thank you for joining us for this session. As Tamara said, I founded my company in 2007 and 6 years ago began the journey to launch my company in the States, in New York. It's one of the reasons that led me to British American Business. At the time, I was looking for support, insight, guidance. It was very difficult to find that, and I came across British American Business, and through their support and insight I massively benefited from the relationship that I developed with key members across British American Business. Webinars like this would have been a game changer for me 5-6 years ago. So I hope you gain some value out of this if you are looking to establish business in New York. Just a bit of context around the format. We do operate under Chatham House rules. This will be a discussion that will last no more than an hour. I'm quite diligent with time, so we will look to finish at the top of the hour. I want to make this as interactive as possible. If you do have any questions for any of the panel, please, there's a raised hand function as always, or there is a chat box that you can put your questions into, and I will look to bring them or bring you into the discussion as well. If we do run out of time afterwards, British American Business, I'm sure, will share the details of those that are on the panel. If you have any more direct questions for those individuals, I'm sure you can follow up directly after this panel comes to an end. So let me bring the panelists into this discussion, please, and I'd like them to introduce themselves. We've got Travis Terry, we've got Paul Monk and Jill Bolins, but let's start with Travis. Travis, if you could introduce yourself and Capilino, that'd be fantastic.
Sure, thanks so much, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, British American Business, for inviting us, and been a great partner through and throughout, and really appreciate our relationship. And great to be also with Paul and Jill on this panel. We've got to know each other a little bit and already learning a lot about their experiences. Look, New York City is the greatest place in my opinion, to operate a business. And what Capilino does is we help people make sure they're successful by mitigating risk and helping them understand the complexity of the beast of New York through a variety of different services, like our lobbying services, our implementable strategic advice, not just academic stuff. We have a lot of intellectual capital on people who have done things in the city of New York, and financing. And pulling that all together is what is all about, is what Capilino is all about. And over the course of my 20 years at the firm, it's hard to believe it's been 20 years, but seen a lot of change, a lot of interesting things happen. We've worked on a lot of major complicated projects like the repurposing and renewal of neighborhoods such as Hudson Yards, Coney Island, and Flushing. We provide critical guidance for mid-size and large-size and small-size businesses, but Fortune 500 companies like UPS, Macy's, BlackRock, Nike, Blackstone, all just in sort of managing the world of New York and addressing a variety of different matters. And then what I'm really proud about is our track record in enabling social service programs and open space and things that matter to the quality of life of all New Yorkers by helping on projects like the High Line, Brooklyn Bridge Park, and opening up a lot of social service programs. I'll stop there as an introduction. I'm happy to
Thanks, Travis.
share more as we get into the questions and answers.
It's a great start. And I think just for context, for those who have joined us, we will be talking about, when we talk about New York today, we're not just talking about Manhattan, we will be incorporating the 5 boroughs. And I think that's an important point of reference for everyone as well. Okay, Travis, thank you. Next, Paul Monk for Alpha Development, if you could join us. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Nick. So yes, I'm Paul Monk, CEO of Alpha Development. So we've been around for about 20 years as well. So our focus is building a more innovative, diverse and resilient financial services industry through its people. So what that means day to day is talent attraction, onboarding, retention, and then what most people describe as upskilling or reskilling, which is obviously vast and never ending in terms of its scope. We're headquartered in London. I'm in our London office today. We've also got offices in Abu Dhabi and Singapore, and most recently set up a full service office in New York City last year. So I'm here to hopefully add some context and some very real and very recent experiences of going through that process. But yeah, I would echo Travis's point on BAB. They've been a fantastic help, both in terms of sort of direct support and also introductions through the wider network. So very pleased to be here and hopefully contribute something back to that.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. And last but certainly not least, Jill Boland from CLA.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
Thanks for the invitation. So yes, I'm a principal in CLA's International Tax Services Group. CLA, for those of you who may not know, professional services firm. Clifton Larson Allen is really the full name. It's what folks are used to calling an accounting firm. So tax services, assurance services, we're expanding every day with things like digital services as well. 8th largest firm in the country. And we also have recently launched our global CLA global brand, including so far the UK, Germany, Singapore, and growing every day. I'll be joining to give more the tax perspective in terms of inbound companies, as that is a large part of what I do every day, advising non-US companies in terms of what would their structure be for a new US subsidiary or a new US presence, and what are the tax implications of that, and what decisions should be made, and what are the ongoing ramifications of those decisions.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. All right, well, let's kick into the Q&A session. So I think that let's start with the first obvious question, what I think is obvious, but you know, why New York? You know, the US is a big country, obviously. Each state runs autonomously as in some regard a separate country. Why should someone consider New York? Now, Travis, I'm going to come to you last on this because I know you'll be flying the flag. But Paul, let me start with you on this. Why did you choose New York out of any location you could have chosen in the States?
Sure. So look, I'll start with the Alpha answer, which is so most of our clients are investment banks. So clearly, although there are, you know, massive financial centers across the states, as you say, not just in New York. New York is the ultimate financial center, I think, still first equal with London. So that felt like a very natural place to head towards. But what was also really important to us, and I think, you know, many of the guests on the call today will be based in the UK and thinking about where to go to in the States, is that as well as being obviously super convenient to fly to from London, we also see New York as a very good base to get to the rest of the US and up to places like Toronto in Canada and so on as well. So for us, as I say, we're specialists in financial services. So we did briefly look at sort of West Coast, California and so on, where we do have some clients as well, but ultimately, and I'm sure Travis would say this more eloquently than I, but yeah, New York's the center of the world, right, when it comes to financial services. So it was a very natural place to go.
Okay. Jill, from your perspective, your thoughts on why organizations, companies should choose New York as a starting point in the US?
So from my perspective, I will advise middle market clients generally of all industries types of businesses that they're running currently and looking to launch in the US. And the ones that I see again and again that want to set up in New York, that plan to operate in New York, and that it makes sense to operate in New York for them, would be high-end retail. Honestly, when they want to have those connections, that presence, that cachet of operating in New York and having that presence in New York. Also, as Paul was saying, financial services. That's obvious. That's where you want to be. And the other one is professional services firms also. So a lot of advisory firms, law firms that are looking to cross borders, that kind of thing. And again, it's about just being there in the thick of things, having those connections, and being able to, sorry, I get distracted by comments. And yes, and being able to harness that energy and that New York is known for, but that also I know Travis will also be probably speaking to with more passion.
I'm sure. And Travis, to bring you in on this now, I guess, you know, a more pointed question is, what can New York offer that other states can't when considering it? What is the distinction, I guess, in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Certainly not the latest performance of our sports teams. So we can't cite that. But I think that there's a lot of aspects that's unique to New York that I think is important to highlight. I mean, one is we have a really diverse and talented workforce here. We are a college town. We have over 1 million college students. Some of the best universities in the world are located in New York. And we have a lot of different perspectives because of our cultural diversity. So you have people living here who are coming from countries all around the world. Our public school system is massive. I love this stat. 1 in every 200 Americans are actually New York City public school students. That's because we have 1.23 million public school students. So workforce is a huge reason to be here. I think second reason is quality of life. You have experiences in New York you don't get anywhere else, or that combination of experiences because of the incredible art, the incredible culture, the food, the open spaces, the history, et cetera, just play such an important role in our quality of life. We can talk about affordability later on, but certainly that quality of life is important. Access to, I think Paul touched on this and Jill touched on this, but access to economic leaders and capital. The international headquarters of JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, I mean, they're all located here for a reason. It's the history of Wall Street, it's the impact of Wall Street, the importance of Wall Street, things of that nature. So you have access to that. And last year, I think the city of New York was about $7.6 billion in venture capital. So you have real access to capital here. And we're also, we have the international fairs, we have the UNs here. So you have finance, media, entertainment, et cetera. And I touched on this before, but scale, I mean, the gross metropolitan product of New York City is about $2.1 trillion, which is larger than the state of Florida, larger than Australia, South Korea. So you have an extraordinary amount of economic opportunity here if you play it right. And then the final thing I would just say is governmental stability and commitment to infrastructure and creating the platform to allow businesses to thrive. So just over the last couple years, we've seen massive investments in upgrades to our transit systems, to our public realm, to our resiliency, things that are going to set a platform to allow businesses to thrive for decades. And I think the people, gives me a lot of confidence too, as clients come and ask us for help and coming into New York, is the economic development leadership of the city and state is A+. Just some of the smartest people I've ever worked with that are in those positions now, trying to make this a more business-friendly, thoughtful place, understanding its role in the global economy.
But it has changed. I mean, to be clear, and I'd love to get Paul's view on this as well, but as well as Jill, but the post-COVID, the feel in Manhattan has changed, right? I think we can all acknowledge that. Certainly those that live or work in Manhattan, it has changed. The legalization of cannabis, the challenges with the police, etc., as well. People moving out of Manhattan or out of New York, etc. How has that changed the landscape for talent, Paul? How have you, and also for business? Does it feel different post-COVID than it did pre-COVID, working and being in New York? And are you still positive that it's still the right place to be going forward?
So it's a great question. As you say, what's really changed, and it's actually the same in London as well, is that I don't know the stats, Travis probably does, about the number of people living on Manhattan, but we seem to get very few of them applying for roles. Almost everyone, as you say, has drifted out to the suburbs, and unlike what happened pre-COVID, where you'd then be on the sort of 6 a.m., 6:30 a.m. train into the city, that we're getting people in interviews saying, I'm happy to come into the city 1 day a week or 1 day every 2 weeks, and so on. And I think that the slight identity crisis which New York is struggling with, again, like many other cities, is you have, I think, Travis name-checked a few of Alpha's clients there. So JP Morgan, for example, if you're a managing director or more senior, you're now expected to be in the New York office 5 days a week. Everyone else underneath that level has been asked to be back 3 days a week. So our clients are back, not often. It's not about JP Morgan, by the way, but more generally, people aren't always happy. But that's banking, certainly financial services, as if you have to be back. The apprenticeship type approach, being close to clients is really important to us. Meanwhile, in the professional services sector, which again is obviously a huge part of the New York economy, and it's where Alpha Development sits, has adapted. People feel very confident about being able to add value to a professional services firm remotely. My sort of modest challenge to that, and where I think there will start to become a bit of a trend, is if you can do your job 2 hours on a train ride away from New York, then why can't you do it from the Philippines or from Mexico? So I think there is going to have to be a bit of a rebalancing in terms of expectations from both employees and employers. And that will also then affect the sort of ongoing position of great cities like New York in terms of that balance.
Yeah. And certainly just to add to that from my side, as a business that serves a multitude of different sectors, I think one of the things that I still love about New York, and I am a big fan of New York, is you've seen other cities across the states, particularly perhaps San Francisco, that has been massively impacted with an exodus of businesses, the cost of living, etc., moving to perhaps the likes of Austin and Texas. Less so with companies in New York. So the resilience of Manhattan, the resilience of the business community in New York, has certainly been very impressive. Jill, what's your view on sort of the feel of the city post COVID and its attractiveness still to organizations coming in?
So I would echo a lot of what Paul said, to be honest, where you have folks outside of the US who are very excited to set up in New York, great, all gung ho, all in on New York. They're excited about it. And then, they incorporate their entity, they try to start a business. Next step is to hire employees. And then we get a follow-up email saying, we're having trouble attracting talent, or the talent that they're looking for, or the talent, the exact skill set that they're looking for. And then again, like Paul said, they're stuck with the decision. Are they open to remote work? Do they want to consider maybe moving their hub of operations to a city or even another state where the talent is coming from? And that can be, in this post-COVID time, a lot of the challenge that inbound businesses face, in that very quickly, like from the first time they put out, a requisition for candidates, they're faced with that first very important decision. All right, are we not a New York company anymore? How do we need to pivot? Do we need to pivot? Are we going to be a company that's open to remote work? And I would say that since COVID, I have seen the most frequent questions that I get from existing and potential clients has been, we're looking to attract talent and not finding any luck in our particular state or even in the US. And so we're going to set up a subsidiary in Canada or Puerto Rico or the UK or India, and pivoting in fully in that direction. So yes, they have a US entity, but the workers by and large are not within the US.
Okay. And Travis, New York post-COVID now, what's the vision? What is the city and state doing to attract businesses that they weren't doing previously? And what's the vision for the state going forward now?
Yeah, I think what COVID did is it accelerated the planning of the region. I think there are a lot of challenges being about the evolution, the future of the New York region, metropolitan region. By that, I think of New Jersey, Connecticut also. I'm on the board of Regional Plan Association, so we always got to think of these hats. But it accelerated a lot. And the basics, simple thing that we had to take a look at was New York has evolved as a place in which you have 5 boroughs, and one of the boroughs was the commercial center. And over time, the planning of New York has been to have people live in those 4 other boroughs or outside Westchester, Long Island, New Jersey, et cetera, and come into the commercial center. We're no longer thinking that way. And there was a really interesting strategic plan put out by Mayor Eric Adams and Governor Kathy Hochul, where they combined efforts to really look at that changing dynamic. So what they have done is they've started to invest and look at neighborhoods outside of New York, outside of the Manhattan core, to invest social and physical infrastructure dollars to enable them not to have necessarily the biggest companies in the world, but the mid-sized companies that are looking for for cheaper space, but also want their employees to live in an affordable area. And that obviously reduces commute times and has all sorts of interesting effects, while at the same time not ignoring the Manhattan core, because that is our economic base, whether I'm a Queens person, but whether we want to believe it or not, Manhattan is our economic. So you're seeing also a significant amount of focus on exploring the evolution of Manhattan, and that means investments in public realm to make the experience of working in Manhattan better, and even ideas about closing down Broadway and creating that as an open space. A lot more effort in connecting companies to workforce development programs that exists around the city to help them attract talent. The resiliency measures going on in Lower Manhattan and the east side of Manhattan to protect our coastal lines from climate change issues. So there's and just the lot of look at modernizing land use. So a lot of the ability to have mixed use real estate in areas to create 24/7 neighborhoods. So that's all a part of the vision of New York, while investing in transit and things like that. The federal infrastructure bill is making a big difference in this. So a lot of that is certainly on the table and being explored and being moved forward to help create a sort of modern 21st century New York.
Okay, great. Paul, next one's for you. When you think back to when the business first launched in New York to where it is today, what helped you as a business? What didn't you have at your disposal that would have helped you, I guess? What were you missing in terms of knowledge or information, and also what mistakes did you make that people should be aware of going forward from that journey?
Well, look, it's fantastic to have both Travis and Jill on the call, because although we didn't actually use either of those companies directly, I think having fantastic advisors is so important.
Yeah.
The other jurisdictions that I mentioned, UK obviously is our home market. We're pretty familiar with it. Somewhere like Singapore or Abu Dhabi, you tend to have, a very simple tax code, just one tax code, one set of regulations, insurance for both employees and yourselves, et cetera. And wherever you sit in the States, and of course New York City is no exception, you have federal laws, you have state laws, you then have often city laws as well. And there are things we've learned along the way. We as you might expect, a lot of our output is digital, was pre-COVID, again, to use Travis's word, was accelerated through COVID. So for example, the tax treatment of e-learning is different between New York State and New Jersey. So depending on which side of the river we deliver the e-learning, the tax treatment of it is entirely different. So you can go down all of these spirals, and by the time you've sorted all that out, you've never you don't have any time to actually speak with clients or provide solutions to them. So establishing fantastic advisors and really ensuring you can rely on them during the process means that you can actually focus on the huge opportunity that New York and the States more generally presents you. Probably the other thing I would say, it's not necessarily a learning, because we were pretty committed to it, is, you know, whether you're in a small or a larger organization, you have to ensure that, you know, the board, your shareholders, your senior team are really convinced of the opportunity, because it does feel at times like you're never actually going to get to the point of being able to, you know, get out there and actually start delivering. So you need to have a very clear plan. You can't just say, you know, America, you know, land of dreams, we're going to go get it. You have to have a real plan. You need to be really convinced with the opportunity. And then, as I say, you need really great advice along the way.
Okay. Jill, on that note, let me bring you in then. So what are the most important tax considerations companies need to factor in with regard to their expansion and the decision-making process to come into New York?
I would say, and this is maybe a little unfair because this is more of a federal consideration, but it flows to New York, or New York's tax treatment will flow from the federal treatment. I would say the most important question that an inbound company should answer is surrounding its US tax structure or its legal structure, and how they want that US entity taxed, or do they even want an entity? And that's because the answer to that question changes who the taxpayer is. So for instance, if you have a UK company that's formed a US limited liability company, by default, that limited liability company is ignored for tax purposes, and the UK owner is seen as the US taxpayer. So the UK owner will file a US federal income tax return and will be the filer of record for New York state and city taxes. It also impacts sales tax collection, determining whether and when sales tax is going to apply, how that gets collected, things that can be a little bit more difficult for folks, and being forewarned about how their planned structure and tax treatment of that structure, where those challenges are likely to arise along the way, knowing that up front and having a discussion with tax advisor and bankers and insurers to see how and where those things might come up, so that everyone's on the same page and isn't going to be surprised by them. I know that it's, of course, the tax person says tax is the most important thing, but I would say, as like just an upfront, I've seen so many clients come to us 2-3 years down the line when they've missed some key filings, or they can't renew their business registration because they haven't understood these nuances, and so they get caught in a tough place sometimes, which is just getting caught in endless phone calls with the IRS, which nobody wants to do.
Yeah, I've been there. Travis, just on the back of that, then sort of even the process of setting up a bank account. Talk about some of the challenges around that, because I remember that experience, and that was particularly painful. And I won't name the bank that I'm with now for fear of litigation. But what are the challenges that people should take into consideration when even setting up a bank account in New York?
Yeah, I mean, nothing's easy in New York. I think that's a fair statement. That's hard to disagree with. We do have a lot of complicated regulations that are city, state, and federal, but I think that there's a number of aspects if you're coming in New York you got to think about. I mean, one is the competitive. You have to do a really robust, and this is, when we apply sort of the Capolino methodology to our client engagements, these are some of the things that we always look at. You really have to do a robust sort of competitive analysis. There's a lot of companies, there's a lot of competition in every sector here. What is your niche? What is your value add, your sustainable competitive advantage, and who you're going to be competing against, and how do they operate? So I think that that's sort of an important thing to look at. Jill and Paul both mentioned it, but regulation, politics, and government. I think when what regulations, what rules impact your business. We've had a number of times where people come to us with various ideas. I'll give you a funny one. Someone had the idea of putting little dog houses on the streets of New York for people. You just put in a quarter and your dog could stay there while you go get a coffee or something. Problem is that there's a public design commission in the city of New York. So you can't just put furniture on the street. There's approval processes for these things. And politics are very local and very different based on which block you're looking at. If you're trying to do like an Amazon project, that becomes fussy and complicated, and you have to think that through. Location is also a very important part that we look at. What are the land use and sort of real estate aspects of where you're trying to locate your company. Now is, if you're looking at enter the New York City market, if you're looking for office space, there's probably never been a better time. And I speak to brokers and real estate people all the time. Probably never been a better time. We're actually looking for office space now. Never been a better time to be a tenant.
Right.
So it's a helpful time to try to do that. We talked about talent. Obviously, there's a vast workforce development program. This administration, particularly our Economic Development Corporation, has been spending a lot of time connecting business to government to academia. In some really profound ways to make sure that companies realize that talent exists and can access that talent for their companies. I think branding and civic responsibility is another really important component of success in New York. To be successful here, you just got to be involved in the civic ecosystem and support what's going on in the city. And I think that there was a comment, there's a lot of misinformation out there about New York, particularly around public safety. New York is actually the safest big city in the United States. If you look at, there was a Bloomberg analysis done, I think 9 months ago, maybe a year ago, about the safest counties in the United States, and both Queens and Brooklyn were in the top 20. So these are, there's a lot of media attention in New York and a lot of folks sort of messing around and try to make New York seem not as wonderful as it is for a variety of different political reasons. That's probably another topic for BAB. But New York, that's an important consideration to bring a business is what is the political media aspect of it all. And then finally, we talked a little bit about finance. I think is, where you're accessing capital and what are the economic incentives and things of that nature you could access.
Absolutely. Thank you. Paul, 60% of the revenue for your company is driven out of the US. How have you found that how have you approached business development? Have you navigated your way in terms of building that network? What have been the challenges from that point of view?
So I think it's not an obvious thing to say, but just be American, right? So as a Brit who spent many years living in Asia as well, there's plenty of Brits on this call. We like to sort of quietly, sidle up to clients and tell them that we might be slightly better than the current provider they're operating with. And, in the States, including especially New York, you need to be sort of big and bold and out there. So what that meant for us, as you mentioned, Nick, we already had, most of our clients are the large US investment banks. We also work quite extensively with BlackRock as well. So we're arriving into the States with almost a tier 1 client base. So obviously with the appropriate sort of white labeling and so on, we were able to produce some kind of use cases and so on, which clearly helped with our authenticity arriving into the States. Even though, and in fact, one of my colleagues is on the call today, warned me about this, American colleague. He said he'd seen other companies lose business in the States before just by not writing their proposals in US English and things like that. And, just those simple courtesy pieces, if you are arriving into a new country, even if you think you've got sort of bigger, better ideas than are there already, is just to ensure that it's aligned to what the market wants. And then the final piece, and again, it feels like I'm being terribly rude about Americans this morning, but we were told, look, you've got some wonderful, half-hour or 1-hour presentations. We want something really short, sharp, and snappy. Can you do it in 10 minutes? Can you really wow us, in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee? And so we created some very targeted, use cases. This is what we did. This is what happened. Bang, bang, bang. And that did get a lot of attention. And it certainly was a very different type of client interaction than we'd experienced in the UK and elsewhere. So, and obviously all of that, as has already been covered, and this is true of all of our markets, we wanted to make the office really local. So we do have some expats flying in and out from the UK and elsewhere, but what's the point in being in New York or indeed in Singapore or Abu Dhabi or anywhere else if you're not going to bring in all of that local talent as well? So be American is, I guess, the headline around that, and hopefully those are a few specifics underneath that guiding principle.
That's great. Thank you. Right. Last question for me, and then I will open this up to the floor. So if you do have a question, do raise your hand on the chat, and I'll ask you to come in and ask the question directly to whichever panelist or all of them you wish to engage with. So final question is, what is the one piece of advice you'd like to give any company who's looking to set up shop in New York? Jill, let me start with you on that one, please.
I would say think through the entire life cycle and all potential permutations of your business up front, in terms of how are we starting, how are we setting up, who are our advisors going into this, what is our business plan? And I know that's pretty basic advice. Obviously, you're setting up a new business, you have a business plan. But also, because of the changing landscape, because it's always a risk going cross-border to start a new business and expanding, because of the unpredictability of the world these days with COVID, climate change, things like that. There needs to be flexibility, I think, built into folks' plans to go cross-border, especially these days. And so what I always recommend my clients, and what I would encourage everyone to think about who's considering coming into the US from any country, is at least sketch out, your ideal situation. What does the life cycle look like here? Is your company intended to be a true expansion that we're just building on and growing the business exponentially because you want it to go public? Is it a US company that you want to set up that's really just going to be a service provider for the parent company? Is it something that you're looking to sell in the next few years, build up as much value as you can in the US company in order to flip it? And even if one of those is your potential plans, it's best to have a backup plan in terms of, what if this doesn't go as well as we expected for whatever reason? The market isn't there, the talent isn't there, our CEO hates the United States, and there's nobody else that we can find to replace them. That way, there's no surprises, good or bad. You've got a backup plan, and it might not be fully fleshed out, but at least you've got something to hang your hat on in terms of being able to roll with the punches and be able to sort of carry on, and as though that were your plan all along.
Okay, thank you. Travis, your view on that. What's the one piece of advice you would give in any company right now?
I mean, other than hire a really great consulting firm.
Obviously.
I mean, I'll just pick up a little bit on, I think what Jill mentioned, just in terms of being flexible, because it's a very dynamic place, and building in flexibility in business planning is an important one. But I would just say, listen and engage. New York City is the ultimate amenity plan for people that want to work here and businesses that want to locate here, because of everything it has to offer. The parks, the art and culture, all the historical elements, the museums. I mean, everything is just, you can have every experience, the food, every experience in the world here. And engaging in New York City in a profound way with its civic leadership, its community leadership, and its government, to really understand how everybody could sort of help you succeed. And listening to them is, I think, is probably the best advice I can give around being successful in New York. Because if the most successful, small and large, the most successful from Google to the chocolate store in Forest Hills that's been immensely successful, the one thing they have in common is that they really engaged the New York City community at large. And that just created a presence, a brand, a nexus a connection between New York and their businesses, and that helped them become extraordinarily successful.
Thank you. Paul, last but not least on this question from your perspective.
So look, I'd certainly echo what Jill referenced, and I mentioned it before as well. So you've got to be convinced of the opportunity. Some things will take longer. They will almost certainly be more expensive than you were expecting. So you have to have a really clear plan, and it needs to have flexibility and sort of intent behind it. I would also echo what Travis said as well. And again, I would say it's true of any city, but particularly New York. If you're going to set up business there, then try to enjoy it. And if you can't enjoy it, then certainly try to understand it. No one lives in New York City or works in New York City by accident. So understand what makes it the place that it is, and that will help you both professionally and personally spending time there as well.
Thank you. Travis, let me come back to you on one last question, just as a follow-up question. What other than British American business, which I would be a strong advocate of anyone who isn't a member joining if they're looking to expand to the US, what other sources of information, points of reference could people look to as part of their journey? What information guidance does the Mayor of New York's office provide? Are there any points of contact, government departments, mayor departments that support businesses that are looking to establish in the US that people could look at?
Yeah, I think from a governmental side, I would definitely explore both the resources and the people at the New York City Economic Development Corporation.
Yeah.
They have a lot of industry-based experience. They want to be supportive, helpful, walk you through tax incentives, economic incentives to make you successful, work on location, things of that nature.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, that's called the what? Just the
New York City Economic Development Corporation.
Thank you.
We also have a New York City Small Business Services agency, which oversees a lot of our workforce development programs, and probably good to have conversations with them around access to talent. And then on the state level, there's the New York State Economic Development Organization as well, which I would also encourage folks to look at because very well led, very helpful on a variety of things. Just they were the ones that negotiated the $100 billion deal with Micron upstate, so a lot of really good things. And then outside of government, I think there's a lot of great resources. I would look at places like, I'm a little biased because I'm on the board, but the Regional Plan Association has done a lot of the homework around the future of New York. They have a regional plan. They just we released the 4th regional plan a couple of years ago. A lot of interesting ideas.
Covering all the boroughs, that is.
Covering all 5 boroughs.
Right.
New Jersey and Connecticut, so that interconnection of everything going on.
Okay.
The Center for Urban Future is another great resource to understand what the opportunities are in the city and the challenges. And then there are organizations like the Association for a Better New York. I'm also biased because I'm on their board, but they do a lot of really great. I strongly recommend joining that organization. And there's some pretty strong chambers of commerce in each of the boroughs.
Right.
And business improvement districts that would be really helpful to incoming businesses, just in terms of networking and understanding regulation, policy, et cetera. And you want to be part of those ecosystems because that will really help you thrive. But yeah, I think that world will really kind of help shape your success.
And as you can see, Duncan has kindly shared in the chat room the link to the New York City Economic Development Corporation, just referenced as well. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much. Right, well, ladies and gentlemen, let me open this up to the floor, please. If you do have a question, please unmute yourself and bring yourself into the chat, or raise your hand, and I'll certainly look to bring you into this conversation. Does anyone have a question in any regard for anyone in the panel?
Nick, I might just, if I may,
please,
just from our vantage point at British American business, seeing lots of inbound companies, and whether they're a large foreign bank or, New York City Football Club that's set up and building a stadium, or smaller businesses. I think, Travis made the point, and Paul as well, just to really engage on a civic level, to really become, weave yourselves into the locally, that goes a long way. And to be a constant presence, I think Paul made the point, you do have to hire locally because people need to see and trust and sort of rinse, repeat, right? And so I think, all of those things contribute to what we see, frankly, the companies that launch and have a long-standing presence here versus those that don't. And then also engaging with the city. And Duncan had attended a roundtable breakfast we did with the mayor, and he invited us and was really looking for feedback and on growing and expanding in New York. Duncan, I don't know if there's anything relevant to share from that breakfast, but there is that interest from the city to engage with us and to understand what businesses need.
Yes, well, it was an interesting chance to hear from the mayor, and I suppose to be positive about the discussion. And I think I talked to Travis about this already, but to be positive about the discussion, the mayor certainly says all the right things about that you'd expect him to say from a business perspective. He wants New York City to be known as a place that wants to help business, and he's aware of, and it may be more perception than reality, but he's aware of the perception about an increase in crime, and he's very fixated on cleanliness, because New York City is not a very clean city, certainly compared to some other cities in the US, and funnily enough, not compared to London, which is where I am today, which is just much cleaner. So he's aware of those issues and trying to fix them. And they're very difficult issues to fix, right? Any giant city trying to turn these things around. Yeah, what he was less willing to talk about was the cost of doing business in New York City. And that's a reality for those of us who choose to live and work there. Is that it's quite an expensive place to do business. And other regions of the US are aware of that, of course. And what's so interesting about the US, more perhaps than because of its scale and its the way it's governed, is the arbitrage that exists between different cities and states, which are all trying to attract your business. And they'll use the tools that they've got, which are mainly local taxes, as the thing to make you think about Texas or Colorado or South Carolina or wherever it may be that is bidding for your business. So, and the mayor was much less willing to talk about that. And that may be because a lot of that is out of his hands. It's an Albany issue, but not entirely an Albany issue. So I think the massive opportunity that is represented by New York City, but I think the panel has been sensible in making it clear you should go in with your eyes wide open about the costs of doing business in New York City. It's not a cheap market. For employment, for tax, and other issues. We'll see about the mayor. It's a pretty tough job. It's a really tough job, but this mayor is making the right noises, I would say.
Okay. Duncan, thank you. Anthony Madigan, you posed a question. Can I bring you into the chat, please, and just provide some more? This is for Paul. But you had a question.
Hi there. Thanks for a good session. We're a small service provider, I guess. We help organisations, generally bigger organisations, make change work. So we use narrative as a business process for that. And we show people how to implement that, train leaders on how to use it, and all of that. We've had reasonable but small success client-wise in New York, in Manhattan, big insurance companies, for instance. And obviously the States is the biggest consultancy market in the world. And my experience is that senior people in organizations are open to outside ideas. I think that's a feeling that I've had. It's not true of everyone, but it certainly compared with, let's say, UK market. But also that, you know, show me the evidence that it works is a kind of really important part of that. And I think that's what made my eyes prick up, Paul, when you were talking about punchy use cases. I was just interested. You could just talk a little bit more about that selling tool, if you like, and what you learned from that, and what works, and anything that's related to that.
Yeah, happy to. So thank you for the question as well. So, I mean, I think in terms of kind of use cases as a generalist piece, before we move on to the US or New York specifically, kind of as you touch on there, Anthony. So firstly, you have to have something which differentiates you from those, you know, competitors or peers in the market. Secondly, you have to be able to prove it. So if you can't sort of, you know, demonstrate something as tangibly working, then there's not much point in promoting it. And then, and obviously in your company wouldn't have a challenge with this, but you need to be able to tell a good story around it. So storytelling is clearly a really big part of that. So that's the kind of generic way to kind of build out a use case. I think what you then also need to do, and this was touched on by Jill around sort of business plans and so on, is that if you are coming either from the UK or indeed anywhere else into the US, and particularly New York, or indeed vice versa, right? That's the purpose of BAB, is just be very conscious of what might have grabbed the attention and, you know, felt very compelling for your clients in one market might not translate across. So I think one of the things that we learned, so some of our existing use cases, which we kind of adapted and pushed out there, that they're quite complex things. So we try to drive diversity or innovation through organizations, through their talent development programs, which, you know, without sounding too sort of proud of it, it's quite a complex thing to do, and we're pretty pleased that we're able to do it, and we think that it differentiates us in the market. When we did start interacting, though, in the States, we got asked questions like, well, could you just aggregate all of our existing training under one learning portal, because we've got too many providers, which of course we can. And we knew that we could do that, but we never thought that that was actually a sort of active marketing strategy to push out. So I think, you know, the sort of how to build a use case is universal, but it's just that general warning to really listen to the feedback you receive and be prepared to articulate your value proposition in a very different way, depending on the market that you're coming into.
Would you say, and it's okay to just have a follow-up, whether any of you would have a view about whether there is what you might call a sort of a New York perspective on all of that? More open to new ideas, less open to new ideas? You know, other particular things, you know, is, I mean, and we've used a sort of a couple of local people actually to provide a local feel rather than a kind of fly in, fly out kind of experience. Is having local people to do that kind of thing really important, or actually is an external perspective seen as valuable?
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, if you're looking for and you know, we have relationships with companies, with other consulting firms around the country, so we're constantly just sort of checking in on this. But I mean, the United States is politically very different from state to state, city to city. I mean, we're picking up just demographically even an acceleration of the move of talent outside of the southern states of the United States because of the restrictions on abortion, on LGBTQ rights, the restriction on what, you know, if you're a parent, what your kids could read in school. All of these things are troubling, but that is moving talent. We're starting to see that move college graduation talent into cities. And you have a different thing that's going to sell in New York versus what might sell in, you know, Florida or Texas, things of that nature. You also have this, you know, because we've some of the recent Supreme Court decisions, you also have, challenges, and I've spoken to legal friends around, for example, could same-sex couples have access to healthcare in certain states? If you have a national company, they might not have it in certain states, but they'll certainly have it in New York, and New York protects a lot of that. So everything, depending on what your business plan is focused and where you want to land and locate, all of that now needs to be thought through and carefully considered, because the story, as Paul mentioned, the story you're telling here is going to be very different from the story you're telling in Alabama and some of the other areas, if you want to succeed.
Okay.
And you have to deal with that, the political realities around what that might mean, just look what Disney's going through.
Thank you. Margot, can I bring you in for this last question? You can take the last question in, and then that will close the time up. You're still on mute. Sorry. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay.
you can.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I put the question in the chat, but I would love to hear your comments on industries that have to be here. The entertainment industries in New York are critical, but also theater alone, just live theater, the Broadway district represents about 15% of New York City's economy. And what I said was I would suspect that the West End is similar. But that also branches out across the boroughs, because there are theater companies in all 5 boroughs. It's just that Broadway itself, which is theaters of 600 seats and above, there are 41 of them, represent that much business, the shops and the restaurants. So I'd be curious to hear what you think about investment in the entertainment industries in New York.
I mean, I could start. So we represent the Times Square Alliance, so we're very familiar with Broadway and the impact it's having. And I think one of the things that's important to note about Broadway is as much as that is the economic center, the workforce in Broadway is regional. So you're seeing, so it has regional implications if Broadway isn't and Times Square isn't taken care of. But entertainment is a continually fast-growing sector of the city of New York. There's been a lot of investment recently in movie studios and a lot of favoritism towards, a lot of huge number of films and theaters and various productions are happening in New York. And of course, our theater community is, we probably could get in this debate about New York and London, but it's, is tremendous. Which one is better? I don't know. But, and there's been, we have $150 million budget on a regular basis that just invests in the arts, and a lot of smaller theater companies across the 5 boroughs. And those are very important ways for the vast amount of cultures in the city of New York to be able to tell their stories. And that's a huge component of our quality of life that's really important to a lot of people. So I think, Margot, you're just going to continue to see a significant amount of focus on that, and then you pull in the workforce development side and the training of New Yorkers, either in the public school system, CUNY, which is our city education system, but training them for jobs in entertainment, because those are well-paying jobs. And it's not just the actor, it's the writer, it's the producer, it's the set designer, it's all of those logistics, ticket sales. All that stuff is important part of that arts and culture ecosystem that the city continues to have a great deal of interest in.
And on that note, that takes us to the top of the hour. So
sorry,
on behalf of British American Business, let me thank all the panelists for this fantastic discussion and conversation. I do believe it's recorded and will be shared. As I said at the start of the discussion, any other questions, then please feel free to reach out to the panel directly. Tamara, any closing comments from yourself?
Just a big thanks to you, Nick and Paul and Jill, and for joining us today, taking time out of your day. We really do appreciate it. And for those of you who are based in New York City, we'll have an in-person event on June 27th with the US CEO of the Fever Tree brand. And likewise, we'll be doing an in-person session in London on a to be determined date. So watch this space. We'll keep you updated. Thanks, everyone.